Here's a paradox for you. Africa is the world's youngest continent, with a median age hovering around 19. Yet, for decades, it's been led by some of the planet's oldest rulers. That era, the era of the president for life, is finally sputtering to a close. A wave of generational change is building into an unstoppable tsunami. But two men are standing as defiant breakwaters against this continental tide: Paul Biya of Cameroon and Alassane Ouattara of Ivory Coast. At 92 and 83 years old, respectively, they are among the very last of this old guard, clinging to power while an entire generation below them demands a future they can't seem to let go of. How have they managed to outlast their rivals, outmaneuver their opponents, and outlive pretty much everyone? This isn't a simple story of popularity or brute force. It's a story of mastery. We're going to break down the specific political tactics they've perfected to survive. The Biya Playbook, a masterclass in quiet control and manufactured mystery, and the Ouattara Method, a balancing act of economic promises and constitutional power grabs. This is the story of how two men became the final bosses of an old political order and why their reigns signal the end of an epoch for African leadership. To understand Paul Biya, you first have to understand the silence that surrounds him. He's often called the Sphinx of Etudi, named after the presidential palace in Yaoundé from which he has ruled Cameroon since 1982. For most of Cameroon's nearly 30 million citizens, he is the only president they have ever known. A staggering 3/4 of the population was born after he took office. And yet, he remains a figure of immense mystery, often vanishing from public view for long stretches, earning him another nickname, the absentee president. But don't mistake this absence for weakness. It's the core of his strategy. By being everywhere and nowhere at once, he has cultivated an aura of untouchable, almost mythical power. While other leaders posture and proclaim, Biya presides. And in that quiet, he has built one of the most resilient political machines on the continent. The foundation of Biya's 4-decade rule is his absolute control of the state's machinery. The Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, or CPDM, isn't just a political party, it is the state. Since the single-party era, the CPDM has fused with every lever of power, from the smallest local administration to the highest court. This is institutional control 101. Elections in Cameroon aren't so much a contest of ideas as they are a ritual to reaffirm the existing power structure. The electoral body, ELECAM, and the Constitutional Council are packed with loyalists who have consistently validated Biya's victories, often amid widespread allegations of fraud. Think about it. If you control the person who counts the votes, and you also control the judge who hears any complaints about the count, the outcome is predetermined. This is the system Biya has perfected. Take the 2018 presidential election. His main challenger, Maurice Kamto, claimed victory based on his campaign's numbers. But after the official results were announced and Kamto's party protested, the state's response was swift and brutal. Kamto was arrested and jailed for 9 months on charges of insurrection. Fast forward to the 2025 elections, which took place earlier this month, and the same thing is happening again. First, Kamto was barred from running, a move widely criticized by many, but clearly made to remove a strong contender from contesting. To Biya's supporters, it was political assassination by legal paperwork, a classic Biya tactic. Interestingly, throughout the election campaigns, Biya only appeared once, where he told the people that he would prioritize their plight in his next mandate. He spent most of the campaign period on a 10-day private trip to Europe. For a contesting president not to even bother about campaigning for election, doesn't that tell you that he is absolutely sure about winning the election? This goes to show how much control the passive Cameroonian president Biya has over the major powers in the country. This control extends to the security forces and the judiciary, creating a climate where dissent isn't just discouraged, but actively punished. Think about it. Just 8 days after the presidential election, the National Voting Counting Commission released provisional results pointing to the victory of President Biya. According to them, Biya arrived first with over 53% of the voters. However, this preliminary result was rejected by many, including the major opposition candidate Issa Chiroma, who has declared himself the winner of the election. He released his own tally, which placed him in first place with over 60% of the votes. Of course, this has caused tensions in the country as people, especially the young Cameroonian population who are tired of Biya's long rule, have sided with Issa. Not surprisingly, Biya did what any politician in his position would do: ban opposition coalitions, calling them illegal. This is the typical system of suppression that operates not with spectacular violence, but with the quiet, crushing weight of a bureaucratic machine designed to perpetuate itself. However, hundreds of Issa Chiroma supporters came out in defiance of the ban to protest against Biya's government and pledge support to Issa. The protests came after Issa called on his supporters both within and outside Cameroon to march peacefully and liberate Cameroon. Unfortunately, both protesters and security forces have clashed, leading to the death of at least 4 people and many more injured. At present, the tension is thick in the air as everyone waits patiently for the result of the presidential election to be announced today. But with the way everything is currently, it's most likely that the winner of the election would be Paul Biya. And if he is, the question is, will Cameroon sit back and watch as the 92-years-old absentee president continues to rule for another term? Or will this be the start of a revolution in the country? Now, if Paul Biya's power is built on mystery, Alassane Ouattara's rule in Ivory Coast is built on something else entirely. To understand Ouattara, you have to understand the trauma of the Ivorian civil wars. Between 2002 and 2011, the country tore itself apart, culminating in a brutal post-election crisis that left over 3,000 people dead. Ouattara, a former top official at the IMF, took power in 2011 after his predecessor Laurent Gbagbo refused to concede. From day one, Ouattara, the economist king, built his legitimacy on a simple, powerful promise: I will rebuild this country, and I will never let it fall back into chaos. And on the surface, he delivered. For much of his tenure, Ivory Coast has had some of the fastest economic growth in Africa. Abidjan, the economic capital, is gleaming with new highways, bridges, and skyscrapers. This narrative of economic competence is the first pillar of the Ouattara Method. He's not just a politician, he's the indispensable manager of the nation's prosperity. The message is clear: your well-being is tied to my leadership. Any alternative is a risk you can't afford. But growth alone doesn't guarantee power forever. The second, more controversial pillar is manipulating the constitution. The original Ivorian constitution had a 2-term limit. After 2 terms, Ouattara should have been done. But in 2016, he pushed through a new constitution. His government argued this created a third republic, resetting the term limit clock to 0. This legal gymnastics allowed him to run for a controversial 3rd term in 2020. When his chosen successor suddenly died, Ouattara said it was his duty to stay on for stability. Now, at 83, he's running for a 4th term in the October 2025 elections, which he has manipulated in a way that ensures he wins. The third pillar is the weaponization of memory. The ghost of the civil war is always present in Ivorian politics, and Ouattara uses it skillfully. Any opposition to his rule is framed as a dangerous step back toward violence and instability. Protests against his 3rd term were met with a harsh crackdown, with the government warning it would not tolerate disorder. This creates a powerful chilling effect. Many Ivorians, especially older ones who lived through the war, are terrified of returning to that dark time. They might not love Ouattara's extended rule, but they fear the alternative. He has positioned himself as the sole guarantor of peace, forcing a choice: accept eroding democracy or risk a return to conflict. Finally, like Biya, Ouattara is a master at clearing the political field, but his methods are more legally slick. His 2 biggest opponents for the 2025 race were former President Laurent Gbagbo and the former CEO of Credit Suisse, Tidjane Thiam. Both have been effectively sidelined. Gbagbo was struck from the electoral roll due to a prior conviction in Ivory Coast. Thiam, an internationally respected figure, was disqualified over dual nationality. A court ruled that since he once held a French passport, he was ineligible, even though he'd renounced it. With his 2 biggest rivals legally knocked out, Ouattara faces an election with no credible challengers. It creates a facade of democracy. There's a vote, there are other names on the ballot, but the competition has been neutralized before the race even began. As such, Ouattara has no strong contenders. None of the four candidates who faced Ouattara on the day of the election represented a major party or had the reach of his party. So, one can say that Ouattara would most likely win the election for a fourth term. The crazy part is that he has already hinted that a fifth term in 2030 isn't out of the question if he feels needed. When the law is an obstacle, the solution is to change the law. The Constitution has become a tool to legitimize extending power, not limiting it. This is the Ouattara Method, a mix of a compelling economic story, rewriting the rules, stoking old fears, and the surgical legal removal of any real opposition. It's a modern autocrat's playbook, keeping the appearance of democracy while methodically taking it apart from the inside. Now, for decades, the tactics of leaders like Biya and Ouattara have worked. But now, they face a force more powerful than any political rival: demography. Africa is the world's youngest continent. Over 60% of its population is under 25. The median age in Cameroon is just 19. In Ivory Coast, it's around 20. This creates a staggering generational chasm. The leaders are in their 80s and 90s, while the people they govern are in their teens and 20s. This isn't just a number. It's the single greatest source of political pressure on the continent. For millions of young Cameroonians and Ivorians, this is their life. They are coming of age in countries run by men in power since before their parents were born. They see economic growth that doesn't create jobs for them. They see a political system with no seat at the table and no voice for their future. The old narratives are failing. The promise of stability means little to a young person with no job. The memory of a civil war they never experienced is less real than the daily struggle for opportunity. This frustration is boiling over, and it's amplified by a tool the old guard can't control: the internet. Social media is the great equalizer, a space for dissent that bypasses state-controlled TV. Youth-led movements like #EndSARS in Nigeria, #FeesMustFall in South Africa, and the anti-tax protests in Kenya show how online anger can drive real-world pressure. Young people in Cameroon and Ivory Coast are part of this wave, using X, Facebook, and WhatsApp to organize, share information, and build a shared purpose that old ethnic and regional divisions can't break. This is the fundamental clash. The immovable objects of Biya and Ouattara are facing the unstoppable force of a young, connected, and demanding generation. The old tactics are losing their grip. You can shut down a newspaper, but it's much harder to shut down a million smartphones. You can jail one opposition leader, but you can't jail an entire generation. But where's the international community in all this? Mostly on the sidelines. Western powers, especially former colonial ruler France, have often prioritized stability and strategic interests, like counterterrorism and business, over democracy. This has meant a muted response to constitutional coups and crackdowns. Ouattara's IMF background and pro-business stance make him a reliable partner. Biya's role in regional security often outweighs concerns about his democratic record. This quiet acceptance has given both leaders crucial breathing room. But even that is getting harder to sustain. The spectacle of men in their 90s clinging to power on a continent bursting with youthful energy is becoming a global embarrassment. There's a growing recognition that you can't have real stability without democratic renewal. Propping up aging autocrats against the will of their young populations isn't a sustainable strategy. It's a recipe for an explosion. The question is no longer if change will come, but how, through a peaceful transition or a popular eruption that topples the whole system. The stories of Paul Biya and Alassane Ouattara are the final chapters of an old book on African politics. They are products of an era where power was won by mastering state institutions, manipulating laws, and playing rivals against each other. Biya, the Sphinx, did it with silence and mystery. Ouattara, the architect, did it with a bargain: economic growth for democratic freedom. They both perfected the art of political survival. But the ground is shifting under their feet. They are the last of the old guard, governing young nations that are done waiting. The demographic tide is turning, and the tools of the 21st century are empowering a generation that demands more than just stability. They demand opportunity, a voice, and a future. The tactics that worked for so long were designed for a world of closed information, not the hyper-connected, deeply impatient world of today. Biya and Ouattara may well win their next elections. The systems they built are designed for exactly that, but their victories will be a tribute to the past, not an answer for the future. They are the last waves of a receding tide, clinging to the shore while the ocean of a new Africa swells behind them. Their reigns prove that while you can delay the future, you can't stop it. The era of the old guards is ending, not just because they are old, but because their methods are obsolete. So, what do you think? Are these leaders a necessary evil for stability, or are they the main obstacle to progress? And as this era closes, who are the next generation leaders that could truly transform the continent? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this analysis insightful, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forces shaping our world.